We all stand with Ukrainians against the horrors of war, and we all stand with Russian protesters willing to confront their own government and stop this war. So we're agreed. The right to protest is a vital one in any democracy, right? Hello there, you 5.1 million awakening wonders in a complex time, difficult to know what's true, what media you can rely on, which governments are good, which governments are bad, which narratives to follow, which narratives to deny, where we stand with the pandemic now, where we stand with this war against Ukrainian people. Well, we're going to be looking at protests, solidarity, international alliances, and ways that we can confront oppression wherever we find it. We're going to be having a look at that today. Also, I want to let you know that I'm touring all over the UK. I'm going to be in Blackpool, Glasgow, Plymouth, Stockton-on-Tees. If you want to come and see me live, this is a spectacular, fantastic show. There's a link in the description. Come, we'll have a fantastic time together. I'll see you there. Now, let's get into this story. We are in the middle of a very complex situation. Ukrainians are on the front line. They're suffering in ways that we can't imagine. You will be heartened to learn that in Russia, there is a strong anti-war movement where Russian people are coming together in support of Ukrainian people, opposing their government, opposing Putin. This letter here that I got given to me by Yanis Varoufakis on my podcast Under the Skin is from Russian people protesting against the war. It's beautiful to hear their sentiments, their sincerity, their sincere desire to live peacefully with Ukrainian people, and how anti the acts of Putin and their own government they are. What's also interesting is at the moment all our MPs over in Canada and over in the UK are saying we stand with Ukrainian people, we stand with Russian anti-war protesters, meanwhile passing laws and voting for bills that prevent their own populations from protesting. Let's have a look at this letter. Remember, this is Russian anti-war protesters. We are told that the opponents of this war are hypocrites and that they stand not against the war but for the West. This is a lie. Heard anyone saying you're pro-Russia, you're pro-Putin lately? We have never been supporters of the United States and their imperialist policies. When Ukrainian troops shelled Donetsk and Luhansk, we were not silent, nor will we be silent when Kharkov, Kiev and Odessa are being bombed on the orders of Putin and his Camarilla. There are so many reasons to fight against the war for us advocates of social justice, equality and freedom that are especially important. This is an invasion. No threat to the Russian state exists. This war produces incalculable disasters for our people. Both Ukrainians and Russians are paying for it dearly with their blood. Long after the dust has settled, poverty, inflation and unemployment will affect everyone. This war will turn Ukraine into rubble and Russia into a prison. The opposition media have already been shut down. In Russia, people are placed behind bars. Soon, Russians will have only one choice, and that is to rise up or face prison. This war multiplies all the risks and threats to our country. Even Ukrainians who a week ago sympathized with Russia are now enlisting in the militia fighter groups. Finally, fighting for peace is the patriotic duty of every Russian, not only because we are custodians of the memory of the worst war in history, but because this war threatens the integrity and very existence of Russia. Russian people speaking overtly and plainly against war, in the same way you would expect any patriotic American, British person, Ukrainian, or anyone from anywhere to speak against war. Putin is seeking to connect his own fate with the fate of our country. If he succeeds, then his inevitable defeat will be the defeat of the entire nation. Then we may indeed face the fate of post-war Germany, occupation, territorial division, the cult of collective guilt. There's only one way to prevent these catastrophes. We ourselves, the men and women of Russia, have to stop this war. This country belongs to us, not to a handful of distraught old men with palaces and yachts. It's time to take it back. Our enemies are not in Kiev and Odessa, but in Moscow. It's time to kick them out. War is not Russia. War is Putin and his regime. We want to stop it in order to save Russia. No to intervention. No to dictatorship. No to poverty. The sentiments and feelings in that letter can be understood and felt all around the world. They feel exactly as we feel about war. They are us. There is no separation between us and them. Russia is a convenient synecdoche that places as an object a country of millions and millions of people. I'm sure there are Russians that support the war. I'm sure there are people in America and all over the place that support military action. I'm sure there's a wide range of interests, but the interests that are always met are the interests that are beneficial to the most powerful people and institutions in the world. Why, that's the function of power, isn't it? The ability to get your will met, your needs met, your agenda serves, your objectives pursued. That's the point of power. Meanwhile, in the West, we see a lot of grandstanding about support these protests in Russia, support Ukrainian people, but how are they behaving with domestic policy? Are these principles and values that they claim to support when talking about this war in evidence when governing their own countries? Let's have a look. Now, you know what's been going on in Canada. They're freezing bank accounts. They're shutting down GoFundMe pages of the truckers. I'm not suggesting there's an equivalency between the suffering of Ukrainian people and the rights of truckers. I'm saying, though, protest is something that you have to put up with, especially when you don't bloody like what people are protesting for. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a need for protest if everyone agreed with each other, would there? On Sunday, Canadian Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and her sarcastic name joined several thousand demonstrators at a pro-Ukraine rally in downtown Toronto. Fantastic. Good news. Stand with Ukrainian people. That's what we need. Everyone to stand with Ukrainian people, like those Russian protesters are. She tweeted, "We stand united. We stand with Ukraine." We're not trying to establish an equivalency between Russia attacking and killing Ukrainian people and protests in Canada, but we are making the point that the right of people to protest is sacrosanct. That's something that must be allowed. And if you don't personally agree with the objective of that protest, that isn't a reason to shut protest down. I know that Chrystia Freeland has Ukrainian heritage and has a lot more at stake emotionally than I have. I recognise that. That's not something I'm seeking to question and query. What I'm querying is a politician on one hand saying Russian people should be protesting against the war. We stand with Ukrainians. Let's get out and protest. When a week ago, laws have been passed that prevent dissent. Let's recall what happened in Canada. Under Mr. Trudeau's decree, police had the authority to push back crowds on foot or with horses, use pepper spray, enter trucks and other vehicles by whatever means necessary, and make arrests en masse. What I believe is that if you're the leader of a liberal democracy, you can't one day endorse the use of pepper spray against protesters and then a couple of days later be out with other protesters claiming that the right to protest is absolutely vital without at least the charge of hypocrisy being raised. Meanwhile, in our country, I'm a British person, 3 MPs who publicly praised protesters as brave and called for Russians to stand up against the Kremlin regime voted on Monday night to support new restrictions on protests in the government's police, crime, sentencing and courts bill. Oh, come on, man. You can't say, Russia, we want you guys out on the street protesting. Why? It's every civilian's duty. England, if you try protesting, you're going to prison, and we're passing the laws to prove it. The reason I raise it, of course, is because of my suspicion that politicians are willing to support protest when it doesn't cost them anything and it makes them look good. But if those protests go against their globalist corporate agenda, they will shut it down and are continually introducing legislation, in the case of Canada, the bank account freezing, and this new bill in the UK that prevents protesting domestically. If protest is something that you believe in, then it is paramount that you allow it in the territory that you govern. They were among a majority of MPs who voted to allow police to restrict protests which cause serious disruption and to restrict single-person protests. Stop it! There's one of you! This is chaos! In January, the Lords passed 3 amendments that would have scrapped parts of the bill restricting protests. And it was these amendments MPs voted to scrap, reinstating the measures. Leading human rights charity Liberty said it was disappointing and hypocritical to see MPs voting to criminalise forms of dissent in the UK. Ukraine is a tragic and difficult situation. Impossible for me to conceive what Ukrainian people are going through right now, other than what I hear through media. It seems horrific. An ongoing challenge is to ensure that ordinary people in all territories have the ability to protest against their government, particularly as forms of democracy become increasingly nullified, as we recognise we can't meaningfully alter political outcomes through the ballot box. Protest is the only means left open to people. And now those means are being restricted as well. while politicians have the gall to support protests in places that don't impact them, it's easy for them to support Russian protests, and in fact, right for them to support Russian protests, but hypocritical for them to limit our ability to protest when inevitably we need to protest against our own government. Sally Ann Hart, MP for Hastings and Rye, stood up in Parliament on Thursday to call for greater support for Russian protesters. On Monday night, Hart voted against the amendments put forward by the Lords. That's the kind of thing that really annoys me. I don't know about you. Like MPs grandstanding and saying, like, this is what we believe in, people should have the right to protest, will you stand firm? And then she voted against our ability to protest. Julian Sturdy, the Conservative MP for York Outer, praised the bravery of those protesting on the streets of Russia. We must also commend the brave Russian men and women who took to the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg to protest the war and show solidarity with their Slavic neighbours in Ukraine, he wrote. Sturdy also voted to keep anti-protest measures in the Police Crime Sentencing in Courts PCSC bill. Another one. Jun Pang, Policy Campaigns Officer at Liberty, said, protests in Russia highlighted the importance of civil resistance. Yeah, if we have allies in actual Russia, just knowing that Russian people feel that way, doesn't that already change your attitude? Stops you thinking, oh, Russia, they're awful. Even though clearly what Russian military under Putin's orders are doing to Ukrainian people is terrible, unimaginable, unconscionable. It's good to know that Russian people, maybe in numbers too significant for us to conceive of, are like, hang on a minute, don't help us, what's going on? Same as we'd be. We should all be able to stand up to power and have our voices heard. All around the world, people in their communities see protest as a critical way we speak up for what we believe in. Recent events have reminded us just how important protest is for people all around the world, which is why it's so disappointing and hypocritical to see MPs voting to criminalise forms of dissent here in the UK. Last night, MPs voted to give police sweeping new protest-related powers, including the power to restrict protests that are too noisy or risk causing unease. Look at what happened in Canada. Some people said, oh, the thing about that truckers' protest is it's a bit noisy and a bit of a nuisance. Yeah, that's what protest is. You have to make a bit of a nuisance of yourself in order to be heard, because democracy does not afford you the right to do what you need to do. What I fear is that we risk creating a world where the only thing that are allowed are empty gestures. Oh no, there's a war in Ukraine. Quick, do some empty gestures. You know, what we need is the means of protest, the ability to, if we wanted, prevent our country going to war. What we want as ordinary people is the ability to meaningfully affect outcomes on a local, individual and global scale. And also the idea that you can restrict protests that are noisy is really stupid. What do we want? Peace in Ukraine. When do we want it? Amendment 87 aimed to throw out limits on single-person protests, which would allow police to place restrictions on individuals staging a protest. Failure to comply with these restrictions could result in a £2,500 fine. Encouraging someone else to do it could result in a year in prison. Yeah, you should do a protest about that. Get in jail! How long for? A year. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss spoke in the House on Monday to congratulate Russian protesters. She did not vote yesterday, but has backed the bill and its anti-protest curbs. Truss said on Monday, we've always worked to support those who speak out in favour of free speech, free media and democracy in Russia, and we continue to do that. We congratulate those who are prepared to go out and protest against this regime's appalling actions. You mad, hypocritical lunatics. If you are pro-protest, be pro-protest when the protest affects you. I suppose, in conclusion, isn't it magnificent that Russian people are confronting their government's atrocious actions in Ukraine? Isn't it great that people around the world are supporting Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better if in our own countries there weren't a raft of measures and bills being passed to prevent people like us protesting? If Canada weren't freezing bank accounts? If we could protest, control our own lives, have meaningful democratic interaction at every level of life, that we could control our own communities, our own nations, our own globe. But that's just what I think. What do you think? Hit me up in the comments below. Let me know. Do you think that protest is important? Do you support Russian people protesting? Did that letter change your opinion of this whole situation? Let me know what you think we can do to support Ukrainian people. All this in the comments. Give us a like. Give us a subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one or this one. Remember, I'm live all over the UK in places like Newcastle, Hull, Scarborough, Bristol. There's a link in the description. Sign up to my mailing list so we can continue to communicate, and most of all, please, God, stay free.